Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm a producer with a gargantuan revelation, but an ongoing, shall we say, journey to the truth with a whole lot of vectors of very intelligent people that are providing invaluable information at a time when our nation seems to be sinking in lies. And today we're recording on Monday, or is it Tuesday? No, it is Monday, August 12th. I can't remember what day it is. It is Tuesday. Tuesday, I'm sorry, Andrew. Tuesday, August 12th, 2025 at approximately 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm joined by Andrew Kreig. And Mr. Kreig had joined me last week for our first encounter. And I was so enthralled with his information that I wanted to have him back as soon as possible. And hopefully we can potentially do this as a regular. But Andrew, there is a lot coming at us. And I want to do a quick introduction of who you are and why you're so valuable in this conversation. So just bear with me for a minute as I introduce you to the audience. So Andrew just wrapped up the 13th annual whistleblower conference in Washington, D.C., I believe at the Correspondence. Where was it located again? Where you guys?
Well, a couple places. We started at the House Rayburn building, House of Representatives Rayburn building. Then we had the awards ceremony at the National Press Club, but we also had a co-located group of events in Arkansas, including at the Martha Mitchell Museum, honoring that Watergate era whistleblower.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, you, especially in the Rayburn building, we're in the same location of unbelievable hearings that I've been privy to throughout the years. And I just want to tee this up from a standpoint that, so Mr. Kreig has been a journalist and an attorney from the highest order. He, is a graduate alumni of Yale Law School, worked as a journalist for a very long time, and has been inside the belly of the beast of Washington, D.C. for decades and privy to many, many things. And the first time we had a chance to talk, I realized it was just basically the surface. And so today, in context of so many things that are going on, I hope we can delve into kind of the next level, if you will, particularly in relation to the Whistleblowers Conference that you had and some other things you might want to bring to bear in this dialogue. But first and foremost, the last time we talked, which was a couple of weeks ago, you had introduced the DC Madam, which I thought was amazing. And you had also talked about a gentleman that you guys were going to award one of your prestigious whistleblower awards to a gentleman who had been involved with the Kennedy assassination. And those were two really intriguing places to start, considering I'd say 90% of the United States seems to be completely enthralled with all things Epstein, in the midst of the fact that yesterday, of course, I'm going to call him the Joker in chief. He just reminds me of Joker straight out of Gotham. And of course, I'm referring to our president. But he basically activated, the Washington, D.C. police under his purview. And this, of course, in context to the fact that he had the opportunity to activate the National Guard during the J6 insurrection and chose not to. And here we are with a guy that was involved with an insurrection who I think many of us might regard as treasonous, that we all know has been involved with criminality for decades, that now we understand has been deeply involved with covering up all things pedophilia and Epstein and everywhere that may lead, particularly with the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi and, of course, Assistant Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. Now, that's a lot of information, but you know it all. And I want to know where should we start with the context of what the hell we're in the midst of, because it seems to be the end of everything that we've been trying to prevent people who are truth sayers for decades.
Well, it's very bad. And thank you for that kind and lengthy introduction. Let me move ahead to two aspects here before we drill down. One, to kind of set the scene, the Justice Integrity Project that I run is right in downtown Washington. It's actually just a block or so from Justice Department headquarters and FBI headquarters. And if you hear a noise in the background, I hope your listeners can't, but I have a little pet dog who thinks he's a watchdog, even though he's quite a small dog, but he's got a big bark. And when he hears activity in the hallways, he does his thing. So I hope it's not disturbing to people, but he's trying to watch out for anything that's not right, just as we are and your listeners. And that brings me to my second point before we get into the deep, dark stuff. But at one point, you introduced me as saying that my decades in Washington made me privy to certain things. Well, yes and no. I was in a position to know a lot of things and work on some, but I have to say that until folks like you help connect the dots and um, and have nerve enough to do it, things that you see, you don't get the full implications. So it was many years, even before I came to Washington, that I thought as a reporter doing some insignificant positions to do work, and as a lawyer also in significant positions, that I knew enough to be reasonably successful. But it's until you start talking to people later in life and see what they know that they've never talked about and can't talk about, but they might be willing to share, that you connect the dots. And so I think that's the purpose of having this kind of conversation with you. You've been through it, you've seen a lot of things yourself. And so we're all in a position of looking at pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and sometimes needing help to say, no, this piece goes here, or that piece. You get a little more complicated, and maybe I'll just use an example of the JFK assassination, which in some ways fairly recently was my kind of coming of age in this. But to use that example, some people would say, well, if the Warren report's wrong, who shot him? And here's where things get complicated. There's a lot of people who claim that they shot him, actually. And, it's most people don't know that. So they think, well, maybe there might be some reporters or investigators who find the one person who says that they shot him. But if somebody does that, and some people have, more or less, there's a big temptation for people, one, to believe it, but also to omit the fact that they may be paid to confuse the issue. And so they're not necessarily making money by going on your show, forgive me, because you're not paying people. They're not making money selling their book, by and large. So what's going on? And I just use that as an example, but we have on much lesser scandals or mysteries the same kind of situation where even if somebody says, to go back to that picture analogy, you say, well, maybe somebody made up a phony piece in that jigsaw puzzle to confuse people, because there's, in many ways, there's more money in confusing people if you're protecting powerful interests than there is in coming on this show and telling the truth.
I
Now,
was
what do
I
you
was
think
going to
of
say,
that?
can I just address that really quick, Andrew? So I continue to be befuddled. But what's so maddening is that, and I'm involved with a lot of very important people who espouse this all the time. Former 3 decades long veterans of the Department of Justice at the highest levels, involved with prosecuting the largest well known white collar crimes in the history of the world. And they basically reveal to us on an ongoing basis we're immersed in an ocean of lies. You can't be in the Department of Justice under Trump if you don't lie. The lies are the point right now. And what I continue to say, and this is what I've learned on my journey, considering the information we have, is that, you know, I discovered, and it blew my mind, that the truth only has value to people who value the truth. Now, that's a bit of a paradox today, because, like you said, people get paid more money to lie, especially if they're involved with, obviously intelligence, media, all sorts of things where they can obfuscate and confuse. And if they hide things, well, then, of course, those that are paying them are going to pay them more because they must be hiding something very valuable. Well, Eureka, that's what I've been trying to get through everybody's like labyrinth in their minds to get them to wrap their heads around the truth. Because right now, Andrew, there are more people that I've ever seen in my lifetime questioning, oh my God, what's going on? Finally, they're asking questions, right? They were asleep at the switch for a long time. It takes this incredible scenario that we're in the midst of with Donald Trump, with a 5-time, deferments and 6-time bankruptcy, and obviously, hiding obfuscating pedophilia right in front of our eyes. Not to mention that was one of the reasons why half of MAGA voted for him, and so on and so forth. So, yes, people are finally starting to ask questions, but again, how difficult is it to, given what we know about media, what we know about the power structure, to be able to reveal what whistleblowers are revealing? And quite frankly, why would whistleblowers reveal that if there is no upside? That's what you handed to.
Well, yes. Now there is hope because some of the people we gave awards to, um, well, all of them really, but uh, they have a love of country. They want it to be uh, a country that they can bequeath to younger generations, including their family. So that's a very powerful motive. And when you think about it, um, throughout history, people have uh, gone to war and risked their lives for their country and family. And actually, they were doing it long before countries. I mean, just a quick sidestep into history. But there were very few countries actually until about 150 years ago. In fact, ours was long predates what we think of as Germany or Italy. Those were ruled by nobles. And so, uh, they had a certain place, a certain allegiance to the land and the nobility, but they didn't really have a country. They certainly didn't have a democracy or anything close to it. So we can appeal to people's interest in that. Now, a more difficult area, having just come through it, I won't linger on this because it's a little abstract, but some people, if they lose a custody case, a divorce case, some other litigation, then they say the system is bad and they want to organize people against the powers that be. But again, those of us trying to assess what's important and what's truthful, and particularly in the media like you are, or as we run a conference like this, we have to ask ourselves, well, you lost a court case and you don't like the judge. Does that really make you a whistleblower? And these are gray areas, just like being a journalist is a somewhat gray area. It means you write things or you publish things, but there's no, I mean, our most important early journalist, Thomas Paine, he didn't go to college or anything, and he's responsible through his courageous writings for having the First Amendment in the Constitution. So, with that background, where do you want to go, Patrick?
All right. Well, I'll set you up with the easiest question. Okay. With the easiest sort of inclination of where the country is. So, what I have observed over and over in social media, particularly, is just an unbelievable frustration that Donald Trump would activate both in Los Angeles and in Washington, D.C. In both cases, it was a stretch because of what happened with the Supreme Court. But of course, as the unitary presidency allows, he's got full authority. And, obviously it's never been used before in Washington, D.C. But again, he's activating the police to mop up homelessness and self-proclaimed, you know, gangs and so on and so forth. When we've seen very clearly that Washington, D.C., and you live there, and Washington, D.C. has had crime, I know, throughout most of my life. I think back to Marion Barry, for example. But you've had the lowest crime rates and murder rates, I think, and homicides and shootings in 30 years. And yet here's the president using emergency, declarations. But yet what's in the background, in addition to meeting with Putin next Friday or this Friday and everything that goes with that, which is a lot. But what have we seen in the last couple of weeks, right? We've seen, again, this demonstration that the Department of Justice is Trump's private law firm. Todd Blanche was his personal attorney that's now acting on behalf of going to visit directly, which never happens before in that particular hierarchy at the Department of Justice, with obviously someone who's been arrested, Ghislaine Maxwell, to work out a situation where she was transferred immediately to Club Fed in Bryan, Texas. So there's been plenty of information out there on this monstrosity that who Ghislaine Maxwell is. But the questions that everybody is asking is, okay, this fundamentally reveals to me what I've always known, that there is a elite group of individuals that are right in front of our face, eyes wide shut, like that movie with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman portrayed 20 years ago, that are right in front of our face, that are above the law, and the law can't touch them. And if anybody's asking the right questions, they realize, well, yeah, it's been going on for a very long time, right? But that sequence is such that, okay, why is now suddenly everybody paying attention to the victims of Epstein when they were trying to get all of mainstream media to tell their story 20 plus years ago? Well, they didn't want to tell that story. They didn't want to touch Epstein with a 10-foot pole. It was toxic. Okay, well, why was it toxic? Well, because people get paid money not to actually reveal truths that the power doesn't want them to reveal. So here we are. You've been in the trenches forever. You're inside the belly of the beast. You're in the vortex of all of the power players. And you have instinct, you have experience, you have access to stories, whistleblowers, and most importantly, you have an execution called the Justice Integrity Project. When I put integrity together with justice, you can't have one without the other. What we're talking about is a complete collapse of the American empire through lies that are decimating and eroding and rotting the fundamentals of the integrity of justice. So I'd like you to just riff, because insight into why journalism is failing and why the billionaire class is above the law, I think, are two things that go side by side. Do they not?
Yes. And there are other factors, but the most important one, I think, is what you've articulated, which is this is a crisis. People are gradually, more and more people are getting concerned. It'll be even worse in coming months and years, maybe decades, because we're losing things that may be impossible to reassemble. So it is a crisis, but there's many factors. And yes, it's partly the incredible increase in wealth of uh, the top 1/10 of 1%. It's not even the 1%. Uh, and their power and their ability to harness power by doing things that were unthinkable 10 years ago. Here's two developments that just happened today or yesterday. One is there's reports of a massive breach of federal court system data. It's thought that the Russians are doing it. And this just came out. And what does that mean? If our federal court system and their records are in the hands of unknown powers, perhaps Russia, with our information. Well, that couldn't have been possible when we started putting laws in place against spies, because maybe you'd worry that in the worst case, people would take atomic secrets or other information, maybe blackmail information, all kinds of things, but not systematic information about the millions of federal court cases and litigants. Now, the other breach, which is domestic and oriented and legal and oriented, but the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2-1 today that the Trump administration could access through this unconstitutional DOJ process people's Social Security information and other personal information. So you have totally unvetted people brought in, political partisans, to take all of our most sensitive information. And a district court judge, and I used to be law clerk for a federal district court judge, very courageous. He broke open the Whitey Bulger scandal 30 years ago by the concept of an independent judiciary taking a look at what's going on. But a district court judge said, wait a second, we can't have these young kids going into the Social Security Administration and taking everybody's data and other places. Where's the law on that? Where's the accountability? And by a 2-1 decision, this Fourth Circuit, which presides over cases in Virginia, Maryland, and maybe North Carolina, I think. But they said, go ahead. And they said, the Supreme Court has authorized it. And so then, as you go through, and let's use the analogy of the kind of Russian nesting jobs, you say, oh, wait a second, so no court can decide things if the Supreme Court rules the other way? And then you start looking, well, who are these justices on the Supreme Court? What's their background? And I've got to tell you, Patrick, I've looked at that a long time. I'm a graduate of 2 pretty good law schools, active in these circles to some extent. It's not good at all. And the problem is that it's very difficult for organizations to, let's say, take a look at who are these Supreme Court justices? How do they make their money? Is it appropriate? And you might think, well, they get a salary and so forth, but then you start looking, oh, they're getting book deals. And maybe the book deal is a veiled bribe. You know, people don't necessarily want to read these books. So it's not a marketplace. It's kind of a marketplace. Then you got to look who owns the book publisher who gave the deal, and what other businesses do they have that might benefit from a Supreme Court decision. And there is a place for commentators, investigative reporters, legal groups that pursue such things. But having been in the middle of it for, as you say, a long time, uh, there's there's some hidden reason why people pull their punches. So let's take some of the, let's say, progressive, not all of them, but some of the progressive legal advocacy groups. Now, when I first went from the business world uh, and had some totally explosive stories about judges and how they're framing innocent people, helping change our system. This is about 15 years ago. Um, I tried to take it to some of these groups, and what they told me confidentially was, look, what we do is we make filings to court, and then our donors like that because they want somebody to do filings to court. But if we start investigating judges, then it's obvious we're not going to do any uh, effective filings. Our donors won't be happy because we'll lose. So good luck with your story. Goodbye. Good luck. And that's why ultimately I started the Justice Integrity Project. And we don't do that many filings. We might, we're sometimes asked to do it, but it's a niche that's, there's other people doing that and fine with them. Once it was explained to me, I understand it. But what we've got to do is create new vehicles, and I'm not even necessarily talking about the Justice Integrity Project, but more broadly, to uh, think, well, what's the big problem? What's the solution? And how do we, let me hold up my hand, it's not going to be that helpful to your audience, but how do we get a solution that will work? And here's a challenge with that, is these people at the Heritage Foundation and elsewhere who are funded by the billionaires, they figured out this stuff in a lot of ways. And so each way that the concerned citizen, the whistleblower, the reporter, or whoever thinks they, or the candidate for office, each mechanism that they think might be a solution has some very significant obstacles. And if people don't know what those obstacles are, then they're doomed to wasting their time. Now, I don't want to be pessimistic here, because if I was totally pessimistic, I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I wouldn't work with other people. And in fact, to riff on that a little bit, I said I founded with some other concerned citizens, former reporters. One is former CIA person, others Navy intelligence, the Justice Integrity Project. But actually, I spend more time helping other people with their groups because it's ultimately more effective. So one of the ways to get around the problems and have solutions is for people in your audience, me, others, to take a look at our actual capabilities um, and think, well, how can we most help? Now, Patrick, you look pretty rugged. I bet you have sports in your background. So let me use an analogy. I'm a lifelong gym rat who once, by enormous good fortune, found myself a chance to cover the NBA. So I've got a little thought here, at least enough to justify this analogy. Now, somebody playing basketball may have averaged 15 points a game in college or something, and if they get a chance to work their way up to the big leagues, um, they may be told, no, your real skill is rebounding. Actually, here's an example from my past to date myself. I went to Cornell University, and they had this amazing runner, Ed Marinaro, who averaged 242 yards a game rushing for an entire season. And this just broke all the records. And people can say, well, Cornell doesn't play Alabama or whatever. And that's why he didn't win the Heisman Trophy, and it went to an Alabama quarterback. But at any rate, he everybody zeroed in on him, and he still got 242 yards a game because Cornell didn't have anybody else, so they just went after him. But here's the point of the story, and then we'll get back to the horrible things going on. When he got to the pros, and he had a halfway decent career with the Vikings and Jets, but they thought, this guy who bowled his way to this record, still stands, I'm sure, he'd actually be better as a pass catcher. So he extended his career, not by being a bruising runner, but by catching passes in the flat. Have to do if we want a better world, and to bring it back to what we're doing here. It's much more effective for me to go on your show and talk. Yeah. Well, unlike Ed Marinaro, from anybody who remembers him is probably dead. Also, I'm not trying to extend a career. I'm trying to be effective at this crisis point for our country, and suggest to others that the truly important thing is to put aside, when it makes sense, our own little niche or ideology, or and think we have to be much more effective, because the billionaires are consolidating power. They know what they're doing, and you can't just go out with angry words and petitions when they've planned for a long time to run the courts, run the major news media, and of course Congress and many of the other institutions we're relying on. Look at how these universities are folding, big law firms. So we have to be smart.
Well, I appreciate that setup, and I'm going to respond with just some perspective for you, so you understand who I am in this whole process as well. So, look, my shortcut has always been corruption births and fuels fascism. That's been the way it has been throughout history, even though fascism as a concept didn't really, kind of evolve until around Mussolini. But, tyranny is tyranny, and it's been going on for 1,000 years, and it depends on centralization of power, conformity, complicity, and lies, quite frankly, most of the time. And the entirety of our country, as we both know on a very fundamental basis, was designed to give the power to the people based on separation of powers.
Patrick, we may have to go back. I think you froze up just when you said fascism didn't evolve as a concept.
Oh no. Okay. Well, I'll go back to that. But so I was trying to give some perspective to both you and the audience for us to continue. And we don't have a lot of time left, about 15, 20 minutes. But the nature of where I'm coming from is I've always said that corruption births and fuels fascism. And I acknowledge that fascism as a concept has only been around since the 30s. But tyranny has been around a lot longer. And when you understand the schisms and you understand corruption and complicity, this is pretty much the story of history, right? And they all fundamentally depend on lies, quite frankly, power. When absolute power lies, or when power, I'll come up with that. In fact, I think it's on my power lies where the American dream dies kind of thing. And the, 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 the whole supposition, the whole foundation of the American experiment is separation of powers, which requires integrity, especially justice integrity, right? Because if the laws cannot be administered and the power can't be held to account, you're going to have a runaway train wreck that leads to your last point, which is the billionaires have absolute control. And we can't go out in the streets and just basically provide pamphlets or, focus on one sort of absurdity or an outrage and reaction, which I've seen all summer, by the way. And I do have to say this as a caveat. So I've attended the 50501 rallies. I've attended the No Kings rallies. But I can tell you, here's the disconnect. A lot of the money for the organization is coming from the DNC, okay? And for the scheduled speakers are not speaking to the kleptocracy. However, the signs are all asking the questions that, quite frankly, the groups that I'm involved with have been resolving, and what this ongoing experiment in these podcasts are resolving. But using that as sort of a build-up to what we're looking at, right? The technocrats vis-a-vis Project 2025, with the funding of what we know the Koch brothers going back to the 80s, but it goes back before that to the John Birch Society and the Consortium of Millionaires and America First and all of these other organizations that actually Rachel Maddow showed us that the actual Nazis were providing material support to the likes that would have ultimately evolved McCarthy, for example, right? So yes, there's always been a dark component of power really throughout the world, but also in the United States. And that's what we're discussing, and that's what we're addressing. Now, I want to hit the rewind just briefly, and then I want to just set this up, and I want to hear how you respond to it. So I'm not an expert in the Kennedy assassination. I, like many people, find myself very interested, and I've, kind of pulled the thread for a long time. But what has always been the most interesting to me is the nature of, one, J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI and everything that elicits. Then you learn more about Roy Cohn and all of the things he was involved with, which mean compositely this almost diabolical, dark. I like to, when I think of Trump, I think of the character out of Gotham, of Joker, right? All of these characters are out of Gotham, right? Except more dark, more sinister, more evil. The banality of all the stuff has always been connected to organized crime. Okay, so set that aside for a moment. Fast forward to the questions that are now radiating, i.e. Epstein, because of the money, right? Some people that aren't hyper-focused on the horrific crimes against children, which is extremely important, but those asking the questions of how this guy who was a college dropout gets a plush assignment to teach math at one of the most prestigious schools in Manhattan, whose father happened to come out of the OSS and be the father of a future attorney general who just happened to be in the midst of Contragate, and how this guy would go from the Dalton School, meaning Epstein, to Bear Stearns being involved with asset management and offshoring of taxes and all those sorts of things at the time period he did, which comes out of the savings and loan crisis that morph into the financial crisis. This thing is moving at monumental speed, of which it seems Epstein has his toes in, because you have billionaires that are fronting their entire empires, be it, Les Wexner. Like I said in the last time we discussed, I've met a few billionaires. I can't conceive of a billionaire handing over power of attorney to anyone that they might be infatuated with. I know I'm inferring something there, but a $4 billion empire, and then there's the background of who Wexner was in terms of their family's connection to organized crime. Okay, so there's these tentacles all over the place. Then you go into, okay, who is Leo Black? Or sorry, I'm thinking of Leonard Leo, and then but Black is
Leon, I think.
Yeah, Leon Black. I had it. That was close. Okay, so that's another multi-billion-dollar scenario where they're paying hundreds of millions for supposedly tax guidance, right? Like they couldn't get anybody in the world. But then you put in there this composite that Epstein has this $77 million mansion on the east side of Manhattan. He's got a place in Paris that's like in the tens of millions of dollars. Not only Epstein Island and the private jets, and then of course the the ranch in New Mexico, which was extraordinary. There is no way, there is no way that some massive intelligence slash billionaire apparatus didn't have interest in what that was. And we all know that, when you have people in compromising situations, you have blackmail. Okay. And there's compromise and all of that. So I could go on and on and on. What I'm trying to say is that without investigative journalism, without whistleblowers, without courage, without people rising to the fore with the truth that holds power to account the way it's designed, the whole thing collapses, which is what we're in the midst of. And yet you could paint by the numbers over decades leading to this moment. So you've been there, done that. You've been in the trenches forever. Give me some guidance. Give me some wisdom other than you're hopeful, because it takes a lot more than hope to persevere.
Well, one, just to talk about Epstein and those people and his place. Just briefly, and I've studied him intensely with coordinating with some of the other, maybe better known investigators, but I also just bought a book, it just arrived yesterday by somebody I wasn't familiar with. And it seems like a good book. So we have to be open to new researchers and not just, oh, I did that. Nobody can discover anything. It's an ongoing puzzle. And just to touch on that briefly, one of my colleagues, his name is Wayne Madsen, former Navy intelligence officer, NSA. He was actually one of our award winners last year because of his courageous journalism. But he enlightened me that some of these scandals, these sex scandals that enjoy a kind of momentary dazzling of in the media, the happy hooker, Heidi Fleiss, the DC Madam, Jeffrey Epstein. He's done a lot of research on this. Partly, the DC Madam gave him 20,000 customer phone numbers to help him look up who these people were. So that's Wayne Madsen. But here's the point I'm driving at. He says this is a decades-long pattern that, and these names, they might, for whatever reason, appear in the media at some point. People are not connecting the dots, that this is a system, not just in the US, but around the world. And people might, in the media, be clueless and just think, oh, this is so exciting. We have a madam in our midst. But people who study this stuff says they're all over the place. and the girls or boys, actually, some of the bait are young men. So if you look at it as a pattern, you get more of a sense of how this works. But to go to your point about hope, some of this stuff, you can't persuade people to do it, really. Maybe you could. Young people sometimes get cynical, sometimes they get very idealistic. But for those of my age, who had parents that signed up in World War II, my mother dropped out of college to join the Marines. She didn't get a college. She had a very successful career, but without a college degree. And it was just something that we need people not to analyze first how they can be effective, but make a commitment that we're damn lucky to live in this country and it's slipping away. We do what we can. We figure out what uh, what's effective, what's not effective, but how would we want to live any other way than to try to protect what we were fortunate to inherit?
Well, look, here's where I come from on that whole thing. That's what led me down this path. That's why I became an investigative journalist. I ended up making our work, The Con, that you can find folks at thecon.tv, because I rationalized and realized that mainstream media didn't know what was going on with the 2008 great financial crisis. I was able to, as a producer, put it together. Obviously, it took millions of dollars of resources that set me on a path to discover whistleblowers that revealed unbelievable revelations of what constitutes our housing market, which was a huge piece of what constitutes the larger financial markets, which then, once you understand that, you understand what controls our government. And what we learned was how millions of people were set up, not unlike the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. In this case, the honey trap was liars' loans. People got into houses that they didn't understand were part of a nexus of a larger criminal conspiracy that would ultimately destroy tens of millions of lives, and that we would later learn would lead to the judiciary, the last gasp, or shall we say, the protection of the American people, was in on it, was in on allowing the financial apparatus to utilize the same methodologies of liars' loans to become liars' foreclosures. But what we did in the aftermath of that was what we provided tens of trillions of dollars to the billionaire apparatus illegally because of statutes. And I'm happy to discuss any of this if you're ever interested, which I've gotten insight of. And it's really the easiest thing in the world to understand. That Federal Reserve Act 13.3, for example, Andrew, wasn't written. In fact, it says in the statutes, you cannot use exigent lending apparatus, the full faith and credit of the United States, for racketeering in commodities, especially real estate. It says that in the statutes. But that's exactly what we did. And then we did that 13 years ago. And so, for example, right now, Donald Trump is accusing former President Obama and all of the Democrats for doing what he's done his whole career: falsifying documents, framing, lying, all of those things. The way I talk about it is Donald Trump lies, denies, switches the blame, and implicates. That's his modus operandi. But in this case, he's accusing the Democrats for what he's guilty of, and he played a role in, but that the Democrats never held accountable. That's the irony. Obama was never involved with falsifying documents, but he let Wall Street get away with tens of millions of felonies falsifying documents. So what Americans have to understand is that it affects all of you when you have a tidal wave of corruption and you have everybody in the banality of fascism, to where you could literally, in the example of what happened yesterday in Washington, D.C., activate the police force to mop up the homeless, many of whom were victims of what I just said, while the guy who's the president got away with these lies and these criminal felonies for decades, and now has gotten $1 billion in his back pocket illegally over the course of the last 6 months to basically act like Caesar, to use the guns to pound the victims of this corruption into sand while he gets away with the corruption repeatedly. So I hope that everybody can understand that if we don't have the truth or justice or integrity, which they're all commingled, you wind up with a disaster.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I know we're about out of time, but just to take it to the more personal level briefly, I talked recently about how our data, our Social Security information, is going to both domestic people with no training, no accountability, or even Russians. And so take someone who's cut off mysteriously from your uh, Medicare payments or your Social Security veterans benefits. Uh, as trust in the system collapses, as there's nobody answering the phone and you aren't getting your money, and you don't know whether it's been scammed or there's a mistake, um, this affects potentially people listening. So it's not just, oh, my heart bleeds for the poor homeless that are going to be kicked out, or other groups. They're starting with that. But so suddenly you can't get reimbursed for medical treatment that somebody in your family needs. Or the nursing home says, you know, your parents have to live with you now, even though they've been totally incapacitated for 6 years. Where do you complain? You see, this is and you can complain, but more precisely, who's going to listen and do anything? I mean, one traditional way, you go to the press. Well, if there's nobody working there, what are they going to do? If you go to Congress, that was traditionally a way. But if they're raising money from donors and don't care about constituents, then you're on your own to go to the Trump administration and say, how come my Social Security check hasn't arrived for 3 months? So these are the personal and complex problems that are in the pipeline. And when I see, oh, Russians are taking our information, I think it's going to be very logical that that's down the pike, because what they want to do is create chaos here so that everybody gets too discouraged to do anything about it. But we're not going to let them, are we, Patrick?
Well, we'll do everything we can, but the American people have got to help themselves. You know that old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Look, I can tell you that we've spent millions of dollars and years putting together truths that the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the AGs of this country couldn't do because of revolving door of corruption. What's important about the truth is that you know who did what, when, and how. So, of course, it could be, well, before the idea was that it would be held accountable by the integrity of justice. But of course, that's all shambolic now at the moment. And I don't give up hope because it's not necessary to hope to persevere. That's what I've learned. I can't,
That's a great slogan. People are going to be quoting you on that.
I refuse to accept fascism, but I also know corruption is what creates it. And all you have to do is put it together because these guys aren't geniuses. They're not evil geniuses. The technocrats are. Donald Trump is just a joker. I mean, this guy, I cannot believe, Andrew, that the biggest befuddling moron I've ever seen in my life could literally take the United States down to its knees. Well, he couldn't. He needed the technocrats and these billionaires, and that's what we're trying to reveal to you. And so I want to ask you, Andrew, before I say thank you for joining me this afternoon, tell me where people in the description can see more about your work, books, the Integrity and Justice Project, anything else that we should be aware
Well,
of?
if you Google Justice Integrity Project, that's the name. But my big effort right now is to bring out a new edition of my book. And I didn't plan to, let's see if I've got it here. Here's what it is. It's about it's a case study of where prosecutors misuse the Justice Department to go after innocent people. The innocent people were complaining about Russian interference in the 2016 election, and and it was led by this prosecutor, John Durham, who I've studied for 14 years. I put together his report. If people look at my name, Andrew Kreig, people can find it. It's kind of a long title. It's the Durham Report, a corrupt, cruel fraud. And of course, it needs to be updated because now it's not just a few prosecutors, it's many, many people at the Justice Department. So that's what I'm doing. And here's one. I'm not trying to hawk books. It's more of a credential to talk about because I covered the trials. So if people want to assemble a lecture to talk about Russian interference in US elections and how it affects people's communities, I'm glad either to go to communities or to talk on Zoom. So that's very interactive. It doesn't require anybody to buy anything or travel.
Well, I will encourage people to check that out below, and I don't feel any shame in promoting the truth, even though we provided. I mean, this is our reality, okay? And it's insane. And I got to give you an example of what Michael Wolff just said to set this up. So, Michael Wolff, the Vanity Fair author that's always been inside, both Trump camp and Epstein and all of these other things, and somebody recently asked him in a podcast, Andrew, well, if you've got all of this information on tape, why don't you just reveal it and just put it online?
He is. And he
It,
can't get a publisher. But to finish your point, I got a quick follow up to what you're going to say.
no, well, okay. What I heard, and I wasn't sure if he was going to greenlight it, but I would imagine that there was some sort of sponsor writ large. But his idea was this requires work. This requires a lot of commitment. This requires know-how, access, this, that, and the other, which requires, most of our lives, people would buy books to, this information. And most people used to read. But in this era of immediate information where everybody just wants stuff for free all the time, they're going to get lies all the time for the most part. That's how the system has regenerated itself. And so we spent millions of dollars to get this information that we brought to the American people. Now, in terms of ROI, we're presenting the $71 trillion truth. There's 1,000 billion in a trillion. We've got the answers that can turn the table on everything if tens of millions of people pull their heads out and go, oh my God, this is what they're trying to tell me. Oh, and it's upon me, incumbent upon me as a citizen to come together with millions of other people to barnstorm and press the truth forward. Yeah, that's kind of how the American, founders designed it. But here we are in 2025 going back based on, to your point and to my point, getting the truth doesn't come easy. Getting the truth doesn't come free. And the truth has only value to people who value truth. So the question you have to ask yourself, I guess, in a free society, even though we're not, but let's just pretend for a second that you have choices, which you don't because you're being manipulated all the time. But let's just say you decide finally that you're going to, take it upon yourself to not buy lies and discover the truth. Well, in some cases, it costs money, but we're providing the truth. What I'm saying is that somehow, some way, Andrew, that's the end for me because I am a competitor. I am like you said earlier, a rough guy. I'm an athlete. I really would like to recreate the paradigm of information and media because as we've all seen, they've all capitulated to lies of this administration, not to challenge it. Because, for example, if you're Paramount, you get a $10 billion mega merger that you won. And then what are you going to do? You're going to get a $7 billion UFC contract, whatever. I mean, it's so absurd. Guns and butter, circuses, whatever you want to say. We're living the worst Orwell, Mad Magazine version I've ever imagined in my life.
Well, do we have time for how many seconds do we have left?
As much as you need.
Okay, here's just a quick thought. A friend of mine who is very knowledgeable about whatever we want to call it, the powers that be for 30 or 40 years. And sometimes I wonder who he's really working with, but he is a friend. And he pointed out something that I found quite interesting. He said that Orwell, who you just mentioned, had a battle with, intellectual battle with Aldous Huxley. Now, both of these men had written dystopian books. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932. And of course, George Orwell, just before he died after World War II, wrote this 1984 where they're beating everybody up and keeping the dictatorship going. And Huxley, uh, who I got interested in because my mother, the one who dropped out of college to fight with or to join the Marines, she didn't fight, she was stateside, but she wrote very important books and worked undercover. And she went to Aldous Huxley before he died, and he gave her a great blurb for her first book. But at any rate, here's what the debate was. Huxley said, the dictatorship is not going to be all secret police and dungeons. It's going to be drugs and entertainment and la la. And that what they're going to do is get people hooked on happiness so that they don't care about their rights. And yeah, they'll take some people out and put them in prison and shoot them, but it's not going to be like 1984. And he wrote a book, Brave New World Revisited, in the late 50s, that instead of being a novel was a nonfiction. No, yeah, it was a nonfiction study about how the drug culture will make people not even care about anything except their happiness. Now, arguably, that's kind of what's happening. And what we as investigators, if I can float a concept here, have to do is not just rely on the patriots and truth tellers, but we've got to be alert to the entertainment value of this stuff, which Fox always has been. For example, they created All in the Family, such a shocking thing when it came out, but, sports and all of this stuff. And we who want to preserve what we think of democracy, we've got to learn the bells, the whistles, the show, because it's not good enough just to have the facts.
Well,
And Aldous Huxley predicted it.
That's why I created the Clean New Deal. Okay. That's what this is all about. The Clean New Deal is just the New Deal with all of the different information that you discussed is important and what we've picked up along the way. But I am very interested in creating a nexus and a spoke and a hub of all people that have been doing this for a long time, that have information, that have something to say, that have things to reveal. Because as we well know, the mainstream, like you said at the outset, quite frankly, gets paid to not reveal the truth. There's more money in obfuscating the power of lies, quite frankly, because of what I revealed to you. That once you understand that it's not rocket science, it's racketeering, then you have a chance. And that's really what it all comes down to. So please, my friends, check out the con.tv. That's the blueprint for how this whole thing works. Check out the newuntouchables.com. That's this group of incredible attorneys that we've assembled that are turning the tables on the flood the zone strategy by assisting pro bono with victims of ICE, assisting with victims of tariff overreach, going after whistleblowers to turn the tables within state legislatures as well. And then, of course, going after Section 230 that allows these giant techno bro propaganda machines to run lies infinitum. That's insanity. And so those are just some of many things that we're involved with. I will say thank you again to Andrew Kreig. I look forward to the next time we talk, and all the best to everybody who joined us. I'd say good night and good luck. Until next time, be well.
Thank you.